Hello? Yes, my husband. He's having chest pain. Please, we need an ambulance right now.
Siren's calling.
Ma'am, you need to move this car. We can't get through.
Hold on, I'm almost done.
Let's go.
Sir, stay with me. Deep breaths.
Robert, I'm right here. You're gonna be okay.
Out of the way.
Relax, I'm moving.
Pressure's dropping.
Starting an IV, 200.
They fined me $8,000 for painting my front door blue. The same shade of blue that was in the original HOA-approved color palette. But what Dr. Patricia Carlson, our HOA president, didn't know was that when she physically blocked my ambulance during my heart attack, she made one critical mistake. You see, I'm a retired paramedic with 30 years of experience, and I know exactly what constitutes medical negligence. That moment of arrogance cost her everything: her HOA throne, her reputation, and her medical license. Here's how it happened. My name is Robert Chen. I'm 72 years old, a retired paramedic, and I'd been living peacefully in Riverside Estates for 8 years. After 3 decades of saving lives, I'd earned my quiet retirement in this modest 3-bedroom home with my wife, Susan. We kept to ourselves, maintained our property beautifully, and never caused trouble. Riverside Estates wasn't fancy, just 43 homes built in the 90s, tree-lined streets, and neighbors who actually waved at each other. At least, it used to be that way. Everything changed when Dr. Patricia Carlson moved in 2 years ago. She bought the largest house on Maple Court, a modern gray monstrosity that stuck out like a sore thumb among our traditional colonials. Patricia was a cardiac surgeon at University Hospital, and she made sure everyone knew it. Within 6 months, she'd campaigned her way onto the HOA board. Within a year, she was president. This neighborhood has been operating on outdated standards for far too long, she announced at her first meeting as president. Her voice had this clipped, authoritative tone that made everything sound like a diagnosis. I'm implementing new protocols immediately. Patricia wasn't evil, exactly. She was something more dangerous, a perfectionist with unchecked authority and too much time on her hands. She genuinely believed she was improving the neighborhood. The problem was, her version of improvement looked a lot like control. The first sign of trouble came last spring. I'd parked my 12-year-old Honda Accord on the street, something I'd done hundreds of times before, while I cleaned out the garage. 2 hours later, there was a violation notice on my windshield. Vehicles may not be parked on streets for more than 60 consecutive minutes between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m., it read. First violation, warning. Subsequent violations, $150 fine. I didn't even know that rule existed. It's been in the bylaws since 2019, Patricia told me when I called, her tone suggesting I was a child who couldn't read. Section 4, Paragraph 3. I suggest you familiarize yourself with the regulations, Mr. Chen. I should have seen it then, that edge in her voice. That need to remind people she was in charge. The violations came like clockwork after that. 3 weeks later, I got a notice about my lawn being 1/4 inch above the permitted height of 3 inches. I'd measured it myself that morning, it was 3.1 inches. The fine was $200. The regulations exist for a reason, Patricia said when I appealed. Property values depend on uniform standards. I paid the fine. It seemed easier than fighting. Then came the mailbox incident. I'd painted our mailbox post white, the same color it had been for 8 years. But apparently, the 2021 amendment specified approved mailbox colors, and white wasn't on the list. Another $200 fine. Susan noticed I was getting stressed. Maybe we should just follow her rules exactly, she said gently, watching me reread the 37-page HOA handbook for the 3rd time. I'm trying, I told her. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the pages. At my last cardiology appointment, Dr. Morrison had warned me about stress. I had coronary artery disease, 3 stents already, and my ejection fraction wasn't great. Stress was literally dangerous for me. I started keeping meticulous records. I measured my grass every 4 days. I checked my mailbox alignment with a level. I photographed my trash bins the moment I brought them in from the curb. It didn't matter. 4 months ago, Patricia issued a violation because my garden hose was visible from the street, something about unsightly storage of lawn equipment. I'd been watering my roses. The hose was out for 20 minutes. $300 fine. This is harassment, I said at the next HOA meeting. My voice was steady, but I could feel my heart rate climbing. Around the room, neighbors avoided eye contact. Patricia smiled coldly. Mr. Chen, if you find our community standards too challenging to maintain, perhaps Riverside Estates isn't the right fit for you. The room went silent. Someone coughed. That's when I realized, people were afraid of her. She'd been targeting others too. The Hendersons got fined for their daughter's car having an expired registration sticker. The Nguyen's faced violations for unapproved holiday decorations, a small wreath on their door. But I was her favorite target. 2 months ago, things escalated. I'd placed my trash bins out at 6:45 p.m. the night before pickup. Regulations said after 6 p.m. was acceptable. But Patricia was walking her dog at 7 p.m., saw them, and issued a violation for bins placed in unapproved location. They're at the curb, I said, exhausted. Where else would they go? 17 inches from the curb edge is required. Yours were 23 inches. She'd measured them. With a tape measure she apparently carried on dog walks. $400 fine. Susan found me sitting in our kitchen that night, staring at the notice. Robert, your hands are shaking. They were. I felt this tightness in my chest, not quite pain, but pressure. Warning signs I knew too well from my paramedic days. We've paid over $1,300 in fines in 4 months, I said quietly. We're on a fixed income, Susan. I don't know what she wants from us. What I didn't know was that the worst was still coming. It happened on a Tuesday morning in September. I woke up at 6 a.m. with crushing chest pain. Not the warning pressure I'd felt before, this was the real thing. Radiating down my left arm, cold sweat, nausea. Susan called 911 immediately while I took aspirin with shaking hands. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. I heard the sirens, felt a flood of relief through the pain. Then I heard shouting. Through our bedroom window, I could see Patricia in her driveway, still in scrubs from her night shift. She'd parked her black Mercedes directly across the entrance to our driveway, not blocking it, but close. The ambulance couldn't get through the narrow street with her car there. You need to move your vehicle, ma'am, the paramedic was saying. I just got home from a 20-hour shift, Patricia snapped. I'm not moving my car because someone couldn't be bothered to call ahead. Sir, we need immediate access, I'm a cardiac surgeon. I know what a real emergency looks like. Her voice dripped with condescension. I'll move it when I'm ready. It took 4 minutes. For minutes while she gathered her things from her car at a leisurely pace, checked her phone, locked her doors. For minutes while I was having an acute myocardial infarction. Susan held my hand in the ambulance, crying. I survived, barely. Emergency stent placement, 3 days in ICU. Dr. Morrison told me later that the delayed response time had been clinically significant. But something changed in that hospital bed. I wasn't angry. I was clear. Patricia had crossed a line. And she'd done it while wearing her authority as a doctor-like armor. That armor was about to become her prison. The first week home, I rested. Doctor's orders. But my mind was working. I'd spent 30 years as a paramedic. I knew medical ethics, emergency protocols, and exactly what doctors could and couldn't do. Blocking an ambulance wasn't just cruel, for a medical professional, it was a violation of their fundamental duty. But I needed more than that one incident. 2 weeks into my recovery, I called my old partner, Marcus, who still worked for county EMS. I need a favor, I said. Can you pull response records for our address? That your heart attack call? Robert, that was too close, man. I know. Can you get me the report? 3 days later, I had it. The paramedics had documented everything: Patricia's refusal to move, her dismissive comments, the exact 4-minute delay. One paramedic had even noted, homeowner who refused access identified herself as cardiac surgeon, stated she would decide if emergency was real. That phrase. In writing. But I kept digging. I started talking to neighbors, quietly, carefully. Patricia had made enemies. The Hendersons told me about the time Patricia had given unsolicited medical advice at a block party, diagnosing their son's condition without examining him. She told everyone he had ADHD, needed medication. He was 8 years old, and she'd met him once. Mrs. Nguyen mentioned Patricia sometimes saw HOA neighbors as private patients at her clinic. She gave me a discount, Mrs. Nguyen said. Said it was neighbor courtesy. It felt wrong somehow. That made me pause. Doctors treating HOA members they had authority over? That was an ethical gray area at minimum. I spent evenings researching medical board regulations. The state medical board took complaints seriously, especially regarding patient abandonment, failure to provide emergency assistance, conflicts of interest, conduct unbecoming a physician. I drafted my complaint carefully. No anger, no exaggeration, just facts. 1. Documented ambulance obstruction during cardiac emergency. 2. Witness statements from paramedics. 3. Pattern of using medical credentials to intimidate community members. 4. Potential conflicts of interest treating HOA residents. Susan watched me work. Are you sure about this? I looked at her. She blocked my ambulance while I was dying because she was annoyed. She's a cardiac surgeon. She knew exactly what she was doing. Then do it right, Susan said quietly. I submitted the complaint on a Thursday afternoon. 30 pages, 12 exhibits, 5 witness statements. Then I waited. The medical board moved faster than I expected. 6 weeks later, Patricia received notification of a formal investigation. I knew because the entire neighborhood heard her reaction, screaming into her phone in her driveway about frivolous complaints and vindictive neighbors. The board assigned an investigator. They interviewed the paramedics. They pulled Patricia's patient records, including the ones where she'd treated HOA neighbors. That's where everything unraveled. Patricia had been seeing 7 different Riverside Estates residents as patients. The medical board considered this a conflict of interest. She held governing authority over people whose medical care she controlled. She hadn't disclosed these relationships. She hadn't recused herself from HOA decisions affecting these neighbors. And there was more. One patient, Mrs. Nguyen, had been charged significantly less than standard rates. The board classified this as an inappropriate financial relationship. 3 months after my complaint, the board scheduled a hearing. In our state, serious complaints meant in-person proceedings. I attended. So did both paramedics from my call. So did Marcus, representing county EMS. Patricia arrived with a lawyer, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. When she saw me in the gallery, her eyes widened. "You," she breathed. The hearing lasted 4 hours. The board reviewed everything: the ambulance obstruction, the paramedic statements, the patient relationships, the HOA violation records showing her pattern of targeting me. Patricia's lawyer argued she'd been exhausted after a long shift, that she hadn't understood the severity of my condition, that her patient relationships were neighborly goodwill. Then the board played the paramedics' body camera footage. We all watched Patricia, in her scrubs, standing beside her Mercedes. I'm a cardiac surgeon. I know what a real emergency looks like. I'll move it when I'm ready. The room went silent. Dr. Carlson, the board chairman, said, "You used your medical credentials to override emergency responders during an active cardiac event. You then failed to render aid, despite being qualified and present. This represents a fundamental violation of medical ethics. Patricia's face went white. The board deliberated for 40 minutes. When they returned, the chairman's voice was steady. Dr. Patricia Carlson, this board finds you violated multiple standards of medical practice and ethics. Your medical license is hereby revoked, effective immediately. You have the right to appeal, but you may not practice medicine in this state pending that appeal. Patricia stood frozen. Her lawyer touched her arm. She didn't move. I felt no satisfaction. Only closure. Justice, I realized, doesn't feel like victory. It feels like balance restored. Patricia moved out of Riverside Estates 6 weeks after the hearing. The "for sale" sign went up on a gray morning in February, and by March, she was gone. I heard through neighbors she'd relocated out of state, somewhere she could potentially apply for licensure again after several years. The house sold to a young couple with twins. They planted flowers in the front yard and never once mentioned HOA bylaws. The neighborhood changed after Patricia left. The new HOA board, elected in an emergency meeting 2 weeks after the hearing, reviewed all outstanding violations. They dismissed most of them, including all of mine. They rewrote the enforcement procedures to include appeals processes and proportional penalties. What happened to you and the Chens was wrong, the new president, Mr. Henderson, said at the meeting. This board works for the community, not the other way around. People started waving again. Block parties resumed. Last month, the Nguyen's put up their holiday wreath early, nobody said a word. My health stabilized. The stress had been worse than I'd realized. Within 3 months of Patricia's departure, my blood pressure dropped 15 points. Dr. Morrison noticed at my checkup. Whatever you changed, keep doing it, he said. I didn't tell him it wasn't what I'd added, it was what I'd removed. Susan and I still live in our home on Maple Court. I tend my roses without measuring the exact distance from the property line. Our mailbox is white. Sometimes our trash bins are 18 inches from the curb instead of 17. Nobody measures anymore. And every morning when I wake up, heart still beating, home still mine, I'm reminded that the best revenge isn't about destruction. It's about accountability. Looking back, I don't think Patricia was evil. She was someone who'd spent so long being right in life or death situations that she'd forgotten how to be wrong in everyday ones. Her tragedy was thinking her medical degree made her qualified to diagnose what a whole community needed. But the moment she let her authority override basic human decency, blocking an ambulance during a real emergency, she stopped being a doctor and became a liability. I've learned something important in my 72 years. Power without accountability always destroys itself eventually. Sometimes it just needs a little help finding the edge. The medical board didn't revoke Patricia's license because I was vindictive. They did it because she'd violated the fundamental oath of her profession. I just made sure they knew about it. If you've enjoyed this story about HOA karma and standing up to abuse of power, consider subscribing to hear more stories about ordinary people who fought back against injustice, and won. Sometimes the system works. You just have to know which buttons to push.